This is Giulia Pierini, partner at Alira Health, and I will be the moderator and the host of today's session. Let's give a couple of seconds more for our attendees to join, and then we will start. Just a minute. I see people are collecting. Yeah. Okay, I see people is connecting. In the meanwhile, let me start again with the introduction of myself. I am Giulia Pierini, partner at Alira Health, and I will be the moderator of today's session. Before we start, and while people keep connecting, let me go through a couple of housekeeping items. All the participants are muted, but you are all more than welcome to interact with us and with our amazing speakers and to make questions. You can use the question section in the GoToWebinar menu. We will try to answer as many questions as possible today. In case we can't cover some of those, we will follow up later on. Also, we will be having polls today, so keep an eye on the screen so you can answer the polls. And finally, this webinar is recorded, so you will be all receiving a link with the recording in a few days. The topic of today is patient experience data. We know how important they are for a patient-centric product development, but the angle that we will be taking today is how the relationship patient advocacy group industry can enhance or foster or impair their collection. In particular, today we will be learning how to identify and collect high quality patient experience data through effective engagement with patient advocacy groups, PAGs, understand the top must-haves for successful industry PAG collaborations from the PAG perspective, and then we will discover how to build enduring non-transactional partnership that enable timely, reliable access to patient perspectives. And I'm very proud that the speakers that we have today are all coming from the PAG and Academy world. So let me introduce them to all of you today. We have Kristen Willard with us today, Vice President of Education at the Global Allergy and Airways Patient Platform. There is also Maria Dutarte with us, Executive Director of the European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation, EUPATI. And we also have with us today Antonella Cardone, CEO of the Cancer Patient Europe Association. Nice to have you all here, and thank you very much for being here today. Let me warm up a little bit ourselves and our audience with the first poll. So let's launch it and let's see with an eye on the screen what our audience think about the following topic. So the question would be how your current relationship with the PAGs, if you are the industry, or with the industry, if you are a PAG, is currently structured. So I see that people are answering, and let's give a couple of seconds for our audience to answer. I see people answering. And okay, it's still moving, so let's wait a little bit more. Perfect. So the poll is closed, and we can say that half of our audience today, so 50%, have occasional project-based collaboration with the PAGs or on the contrary with the industry, while only 34% has regular and structured collaborations. And there is also 13% that has early stage exploration conversation. So this is actually pretty interesting, because this is project-based collaboration is one of the topics that we will cover today. So without further ado, let's go into it. And let me start with a very foundational question. And maybe Maria, you want to kickstart the conversation. So I would like to ask you, and then also the other speakers, what do we mean by patient experience data? And allow me to be a little bit provocative here. Can we say that they are always high quality data?
Thank you for this question. Patient insights are really unique in nature, and patient experience data is either qualitative or quantitative quantitative data that reflects these patient insights that can cover unmet needs, the burden of living with the disease, or quality of life aspects as well. So it's a very broad type of, let's say, insight gathering that can happen through this patient experience data collection. And we understand that this type of data can play a key role in drug development, as it highlights the unique type of insights of patients. We understand that patients are in a unique position to inform treatment development because they have the lived experience. And they are also the ultimate, let's say, beneficiaries of treatments and care. To your second question, are there also low quality patient experience data? I would say I don't believe so. If this data is collected in a representative manner, and it in a meaningful way can inform treatment development, I believe these insights are all valuable. And we see that the latest development in the conversation around patient experience data points to that fact. We understand its value even better than before.
Thank you, Maria. And understand, Kristen, we were also discussing this topic together the other day. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I really appreciate this and Maria's viewpoint. I think one of the things I just want to add is that I think it's important that we also talk about representativeness when we're having these conversations. So sometimes the inputs tend to be collected from our savviest patient advocates. So these might be the people who have been in the field for a long time, right, who are used to speaking with industry, and based on their viewpoints, their experiences are crucial. So we don't want to downplay that. But what we want to do is make sure that other patients who have not yet had the opportunity, patients and caregivers, family members for that matter, who have not had the opportunity to be represented, that they are also included. So we really want our industry partners to be asking themselves the question, am I collecting data that is representative of the entire patient population that I would like to help?
Thank you, Kristen. And I agree a lot with both you and Maria. I think that the planning phase of the collection of patient experience data is key to ensure robustness of data and representativeness, because then these data are also translated that can be bring in front of many other stakeholders, regulators, policymakers, the medical community, payers. So it's very important that we plan rigorous methodology for collecting them. And this has been said by PFMD guidelines from FDA for a long time, but also recently the EMA has released a position paper, reflection paper on patient experience data, and this was highlighted also there. Antonella, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I think that when assessing the quality of the data collected, it is very important to consider the methodology and the procedures used, because data should be collected in a standardized way throughout the study, from the beginning until the end, with the given points of collection standardized. And most importantly, it is fundamental to provide the patients with the right information, including the duration, possible side effects, etc., and in a user-friendly manner. So feedback should also be provided at given points during the implementation of the study. And a final report at the end of the study, even if the study is not to be considered successful. So the feedback should be provided, and the report at the end should be given to the patients. And I believe that only under these conditions, the data collected are high quality and are at the basis of a trustful relationship between the patients and the industry.
Absolutely. So providing context to patients, allow them to gave us high quality information that we can then use, and then of course give back to the community feedback on what happened. And this a little bit brings me to my second question, that would be how the collaboration between PAGs, so patient advocacy groups, and the industry can foster the collection of patient experience data. Maybe Kristen, would you like to pitch on that?
Sure. So I think we all have many thoughts on these, but somewhere to start is just to make sure that the industry partners' engagement with the patients and the caregivers is what I think of as being thoughtful and intentional, right? Mm-hmm. That there is a plan, that you engage them early enough. I think you see sometimes in some, not many, but some relationships where engaging with these communities is more of an exercise in checking a box rather than collecting information that will be used as the foundation of the work that's being done. And so one of the things that industry partners may not know is that the patients can sense when that is the case. They know when that is, when their voices are not being heard or when they're not being incorporated into the overall plan. So that's something to know.
Absolutely. And I remember during our conversation previous to this webinar, you were also making some clear examples, no, when that's the case, that that can happen. For example, I remember you said, no, please go ahead.
Yeah, the biggest thing, Giulia, I think the biggest thing is that people being involved too late in the process. So sometimes you will see that a campaign is about to be launched, or a trial design has already been finalized. And it's at that point that people are asked for their feedback, when it's really just an exercise or something for show. And that isn't helpful. You know, patients and family members know that then their viewpoints will not be represented. So you want to engage everyone early on at the beginning, just when you're building everything.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kristen. Antonella, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can also provide an example from our side. For instance, now we are looking to develop an horizon scanning exercise of what is coming next to the market. We're looking at a time frame of a couple of years. We often hear from the industry that they are hesitant to disclose what they have in the pipeline, as it may disappoint or create false expectations if then the development doesn't go into the desired direction. I believe that even in that case, it is important for us to have the information, as it shows openness from the side of the industry, and then also we are aware that failures are part of life. So if then the study doesn't have the good and positive impact as it was foreseen, that's fine. And we know that well. And as I was saying before, providing a full context and be transparent is key to get the most value out of this relationship with the industry.
Thanks, Antonella. And another thing that I hear a lot is from the industry sometimes is we don't want to be disappointed the patient community if they tell us that they would like A, B, C potentially in a clinical trial development, and then we cannot meet all of their expectation, or we can meet only partially, not them. And I think that, as you said, being transparent and explain that we cannot meet everything, but maybe we can do an effort and go in the direction of A, but not B. It's important for the patient community to have context. Another question, maybe Maria, if you would like to pitch on that, is what do you think are the must-haves in the collaboration patient advocacy group in the industry?
Thank you. I think a lot has already been said. Being thoughtful and intentional was mentioned here, and having a very clear and transparent agenda for the interaction. And I'm quite familiar with a model called the Community Advisory Board. And there's also many types of these CABs. And I used to work in an organization, patient organization, where this model was used. And it also allowed the community and the patients to come together prior to the interaction and align and plan together, but also there was a sort of a capacity building element to this, where patients could be briefed about the content of the upcoming meeting and almost like study the topic at hand. As we understand, especially coming from EUPATI, where we train patients about the entire life cycle of medicines, R&D, to empower the advocacy. And I believe that capacity building and is really important here, as knowledge is often the key, and speaking the same language throughout the interaction is really important. So the community advisory board model can provide this space where community members can come together prior to the interaction with the other stakeholder representatives, and also afterwards to brief what has happened, what have we learned, what are the key messages we are taking forward, were there things that we didn't understand, can we together brief and learn from this experience. So that also, I think, points to how important it is to have continuity and continuous learning, and bringing new members of the patient organization, the community, to join this work. But I'm sure we will come to that point later also during the webinar.
Yes, but I think you raise a very important point, which is co-creation with a shared intent, because this is what makes the treatment development mutually beneficial for all the stakeholders. And I also agree on the education and the pre-alignment part. That's particularly important in all the interactions we have with patients, in councils, as you said, but for example, also advisory boards. And I think it's because, as you said, it creates a common understanding on the topic we are going to discuss, but also it creates a relationship between people, among people, so it's easier when we are all together to share and to be transparent and thoughtful in the way we share our insights. Antonella, do you have anything to add?
Well, I will add, reiterating what I mentioned before, that a trust-based relationship is key, not only for the reasons mentioned before, because if the interaction between patients and the industry is not based on transparency and trust, patients could decide not to be honest in their answers. For example, if or when the patients understand that they are consulted only for a tick-the-box exercise, or they suspect that the industry might use the data for who knows what reason, they do not put an effort to answer the truth and may themselves just answer as a tick-the-box exercise, just the industry. So I think that it is very important to develop this mutual understanding, mutual collaboration, and trustful relationship. That is key, and from the very beginning, because if this trust is doubted at one point, it will be very difficult to rebuild on it.
Thank you very much, Antonella, and I'm glad you brought up this point, because when you told me this thing the first time we spoke, I realized that, and here maybe I'm putting my industry hat if I can, we don't often think that the patient itself can be pushed to answer in a way that may be not reflective of the reality. And when we were talking, I remember you told to me, for example, if we are having an interaction with patients, an interview, an advisory board, a council, and we are very focused on time, for example, and the moderator is pushing for having the response in a timely manner because we have an agenda and we have to follow them, maybe the patient itself, like you said, will say, okay, I just say, whatever they want to hear, or I will be quick in my answers, and that's it. This is very interesting. My follow-up question for you, Antonella, how do you think we can mitigate this risk on top of building trustworthy relationship, as you said, with the patient community?
Again, it is crucial to be open and frank from the beginning of the study, dedicating all the necessary time during the ad boards meetings and interviews to explain what the study is about, for instance, but also the risks and the benefits. As I mentioned before, feedback must be provided at the beginning and then at given times during the study, during the meetings, even if negative, even if something is going wrong or not as expected. And patients will understand and appreciate this openness. And then also patronizing is another risk that should be avoided. Remember, there is no stupid patient. So the industry is the expert and must be able to explain in a simple language what the study is about and all that goes with it. So preparation of the ad board, the preparation of the patients, preparation of the content that is going to be presented to the patients is key.
Absolutely, and that relates to Maria's point about education that she was making before. I agree. As a moderator, I think it's key to really prepare and be intentional in the way we make questions and we ask feedback that at the end of the day are very valuable also for us to the patient community. So I relate a lot to that. Thank you. Kristen, would you like to add something on this topic?
Yes, and I really want to state first that I agree completely with Antonella. I think that trust is key, should be one of the bullet points that guides all of these conversations moving forward. It's essential to establish that. I think that industry partners try to create a safe space for participants to have those conversations, but sometimes things can go wrong. So there are times when, this is an exaggeration, but you might feel as if you have just as many industry partners in the room as you have patients and family members, and that really does not create a safe space, let's say. But there are ways that you can create the safe space. I think one of the ways is having the patient advocacy group or a facilitator that's quite skilled in these conversations, being the person who's leading the conversation, because they become a trusted partner for those individuals who are there. So I think that those things can help very much, and also letting, to the extent possible, the community that's in the room drive the conversation rather than the time being what's most important, like you said, or the facilitator's needs, but really what do we want to accomplish, and maybe the patients and family members know better how to get there.
Absolutely. And while you were talking, I was also thinking that we always have to remember that lay people, lay patients, but also like me, like everyone, we sometimes are not people that are used to skilled and used to speak in public, no, and also present an emotional experience in public and in front of others. So it's our responsibility to provide them with a safe space to do so. Thank you, Kristen. I think it's a good moment to then launch our second poll. So I will ask the audience to see the poll and answering. So the second poll question would be, what do you see as the biggest barrier to creating safe, balanced, and trust-based PAG industry interaction? And we have several options: lack of internal alignment or ownership, limited time of resources, fear of regulatory or compliance constraint, and then lack of training. I see quite a split audience so far, but let's see the poll results. People are still answering. Okay, so it's quite divided, our audience today. So we have 30% approximately that think that limited time or resources to engage meaningfully could be a reason, a barrier to create this safe collaboration and meaningful collaboration we are talking. Another 30% thinks that concerns about regulatory and compliance could be one constraint, and then 25% think about lack of trainings. That's very interesting. So the lack of training part is related to Maria's point about education, so it goes in that direction. Concern about regulatory compliance, I can see it from the industry, although I have to say that in my perspective, there are still a lot of misconception or let's say heritage from the past. Now, this concept of it's not possible to engage with patients or ask them. I mean, it's totally possible to ask the experience of patients and their feedback about, for example, a clinical trial. So this may be an heritage from the past. And lack of time of resources, I also think this is something that sort of comes from the past. But maybe the best way to answer this, our audience about it, is about examples. Do you have in mind examples of past interactions with the industry that have been very successful from your point of view, and why? Kristen, maybe you want to provide us some examples.
I would be happy to. It's nice to celebrate, I think, the successes and when things are done well. And thankfully, I have many more successful examples to share than those that did not work out. One of the most successful patient advocacy roundtables, let's say, that I was a part of was in a previous role when I was working at a patient advocacy organization. It was a year-long patient and caregiver advocacy council. So as the PAG, we recruited a variety of patients and caregivers, addressing that diversity and representativeness that we had talked about earlier. We, as the patient advocacy organization, I think this is a really important point. We were not on the periphery of the conversation. We were the ones who were managing the day-to-day oversight of the council, and we were also engaging directly with the participants. So I think that was important too. Now, because of our involvement in that capacity, because we were already trusted to the patient community, excuse me, I think the patients then felt safe in having those conversations with us. I want to make the point too that this was a year-long endeavor, and that came from the side of the industry partner. They were interested in doing this for a year because it was a year-long repeated meeting setup. Participants knew that this industry partner was invested in them. They knew that they wanted to hear what they had to say, and this was not, as Antonella said before, checking a box or a one and done, as they're sometimes called. And then in turn, the patient group felt they more invested because they knew that people had invested the time in them, and that worked beautifully to the point where, and I'm not sure if I've shared this with you in the past, but that the patients who were involved wanted to go into a second year if it was possible because of how much they found it beneficial. It's just a win-win all over. More recently, I have an example from an industry partner that we had worked with. This is several groups, actually, not just one group, because it was a patient advisory council, and we created a digital tool, and that tool was designed to be used by patient advocates in their conversations with policymakers to discuss the patient experience and discuss gaps in care and what calls to action were really needed. And this was for people specifically with COPD. And the final result for this tool, it's embedded not only with the evidence and the economics that the policymakers are used to hearing, but it is embedded with the patient experience through quotes, through ethnographic videos, which really show what it's like for this particular person. And these are global videos, people around the world, what it's like for them to try to work with COPD, to go through their day-to-day with COPD. And that gives such a value to it. And I can't imagine almost a more effective way of a patient feeling heard than allowing to share their story. And imagine being that vulnerable to invite someone in your home to share that. So I think there was a great level of respect for the patient in that experience, and also for the patient advocacy groups who were really involved from day one. We built that, hand in hand with all the organizations, and that is a key point for this. And then lastly, I want to return to what Antonella said about our responsibility to the communities after our projects have ended. And I think it's important that we don't think of a project having ended until we have reported back to the people who informed the project. It could be a clinical trial, it could be an advocacy event, it could be any of the areas in which we all work. But if patients and families have contributed their voices, their time, their experiences, we owe it to them to tell them what's happened. We do not need to fear telling them negative results. It's best that they are informed, right? And I think even better if we can use patient advocacy organizations like ours as a conduit to do that, right? To get this information to the community. But they are owed that. They are owed that for all that they have given us.
Thank you, Kristen. You touched so many points. So you touch co-creation, you touch feedback to the community, you touch embedding the final output with the patient experience data elaborated in a way that is meaningful for both parties. You mentioned merging the emotional perspective with evidence and economic data. So great examples. Thank you very much. And you touch also, you talk about feedback loop, which is something that Antonella was mentioning at the beginning. Antonella, what's your experience with in terms of collaboration with the industry?
Well, I believe that things are changing now and are changing for the better. So, for instance, we have been working with the company for over a year, and we were aimed at developing a sort of a patient centricity charter with this company, so that the patient centricity would have been embedded in the whole company, from cultural values to practical standpoints. So we met in person twice. We had several online meetings, and the relationship with the company was very proactive. So we felt that we were really heard. Whenever we provided feedback, they took our feedback into consideration, also changing significantly what they had drafted and sought for. So, for instance, once we asked an additional meeting and they accepted it, or they, as I said, they changed the content of significantly of what they drafted, and also we used those moments for a true networking exercise among the patient community. So that was really conceived as a productive interaction, a trustful interaction. So we felt very positive after those meetings. And that was very, very impactful in the end. They generated a good feeling in the patients involved in the process. Also, I consider in general a successful interaction with the industry when the different sections of the companies start being contaminated by this concept of patient centricity, so that the patients do not the different departments do not work in silos, and this is very rare. So usually, for instance, the patient engagement team understands the value of patients' interaction and patient experience data collection. The problem is that other departments, including the normally called the medical or market access, so those would be the departments, the sections of the company that would benefit the most from a trustful interaction with the patients, ironically, are those who ignore patients most. I'm generalizing now. And so change would really come with a long-lasting commitment of the entire company, not only the patient engagement function.
Thank you very much, Antonella. I have nothing to add because I think you made very precious feedback for all of us that works in the field, also our industry partners. So thank you very much. Maria, I know you also have a very nice examples of successful collaboration.
Indeed, I'm happy to share an example, and this what Antonella just mentioned about things happening that are maybe unexpected and maybe unscripted is I think the magic that can happen through patient involvement and this kind of engagement. And I think when we are ready to change our plans in the middle of what we thought was going to happen is the best, because then I think we are listening truly to the patient voice. So my example comes from our collaboration with an industry partner through our EUPATI fellows, who are the expert patients that we trained. They were engaged in a quite an interesting initiative when this company wanted to launch or establish a new research institute, and so this actually a physical building was going to be established, and their idea was first to have patients involved in the design and construction of the center so that it would reflect a different patient-centric approach. And what ended up happening is that the patients who were involved through this PAG group then actually were changing the culture of the organization in many ways. So in the end, after this long-term engagement, it took many years, there were actually many new elements being implemented in the institutional culture of that company. So, and this is now well documented in different peer-reviewed articles as well. So I find it very powerful as an example, because it also shows that when you are open to through that engagement, you're listening, you're open to also take in other input that was maybe not planned in the first place, and change sort of your direction and change your plan halfway. I think it can be really fruitful, but I also understand the difficulties then in sort of planning. But there are now good examples, and I would encourage all the viewers of this webinar to also look around what has already been published about these good examples of what happened, what worked, what didn't, and how can we learn from these experiences.
Thank you very much, Maria. I think that sometimes when it's the change that is required, we are very worried about the short term, no? But it's difficult also, maybe because of what Antonella was saying, of working in silos, to have, you know, the complete picture and thinking of the long-term impact of what we are doing, even if it requires a change and requires to be a little bit agile, and maybe it will pay off in the long term. So thank you very much. I think what is very interesting is that the three of you have mentioned long-term engagement. So this is already a clear indicator of what is needed, not, I mean, what we were saying, tick off box ticking exercise or one shot, but long-term engagement is what the Patient Advocacy Group and the academies is asking to industry. And also you have talked a lot about council type of engagement, which I find interesting because on the other side, on the industry, a type of methodology that is very established, especially at clinical level, is patient advisory board, which is similar, but it's maybe more short term. So it's everything connected. Maybe one last question, and then we go through. We see if we go through a couple of more questions, and then we see the question from the audience. Would be: do you think there are methodologies that are easier for the patient community to implement and makes patient experience data collection easier, less burdensome for the patient community? Antonella, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So we believe, and we use this form of consultation with the patients often, and we think that a combination of surveys and focus groups survey gives us some preliminary input, and with the focus group we can go deep into some of the problems identified. So the survey, though, in order to be optimal, should include as many
Is it me or
pardon?
can you hear Antonella well? No, right?
No, I can't hear Antonella at the moment.
You
Yes.
cannot hear me?
Now we can hear you. You are frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay, so I was saying that a combination of surveys and focus groups is ideal. Surveys should be with as many closed questions as possible, with the possibility to add information if the participants wants to. And then surveys are easier for patients to fill in, as they can be easily organized in different languages. Patients are more independent in answering, although of course they have to be designed in a user-friendly way. And even if the creation of the survey can be a co-creation exercise with the patients, for instance. So the survey can then be complemented with a focus group to deep dive in some priority topics, or to work on solutions of possible hurdles that have quantified in the survey.
Perfect. So a semi-quanti, let's say, quantitative and mixed methods, quanti plus quali.
Yeah, and I could also say that the focus group is can be easily assimilated to an ad board meeting that normally the industries use. They don't have to be articulated in a idealistic way. They can be just an ad board meeting, but what is important is to have the survey first with closed questions, possibly in different languages, and then the ad board meeting or focus group.
Thank you, Antonella. Maria?
Yes, I think here flexibility and sort of also creativity is the key. Also understanding who the target audience is, what kind of condition they live with, and what is their availability, and also listen to their needs very closely when planning the interaction. And I would still think while surveys and focus group discussions can bring a lot of input, if this is about a long-term relationship and building a connection with the community, I think well-planned face-to-face meetings would be recommended. But I think it really depends on the objective, the focus of the activity, and the patient group that is in focus. I'm thinking now also maybe young patients that might not be so willing to answer surveys. This group might need something completely different to capture their views. So I think it really depends.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, I agree. Definitely also sometimes the in-person component now that you mentioned could be interesting. We tend to do things a lot of online. And of course it depends on the goal. This I totally agree. I mean, it depends really on the goal, what we want to do. There are many different methodologies for different purposes. We have recently published an article about the different methodologies that can be used to collect patient experience data. And now, for example, with the reflection paper of EMA, there is a lot of focus on patient preference studies, which is something that has been out there for quite a while, but not really implemented on a standard basis. Maybe one follow-up question for Kristen would be, do you think patients and regulators would be open to methodologies, for example, patient preference studies? There are many that we could cite that are established but less common somehow, and sometimes even more burdensome for the patients to participate?
It's a great question. And I think speaking to I can speak to patients more easily, but I think that patients are open to many different ways of doing things. But I think it goes back to what my colleagues were saying, that the transparency is the key, you know, ensuring that they understand what is expected of them, how long it will take, how those data will be used ultimately. I think when you lay the groundwork there and talk about how this is expected to help them or other people moving forward, and they have the entire picture, they can then make an informed decision. But I think that you would find patients for sure who would be interested in that type of approach and willing to help.
Yeah, and in the reflection paper of EMA as well as the PFMDD guidelines, regulators encourage now the collection of patient experience data and to implement them in dossier, and they are also open to different methodologies. They just say that they should be discussed sort of in advance, now in the planning phase. So this is also something that potentially in the future we can explore more. I would go for one last question before opening to the audience, and maybe this is more for Kristen and Antonella. What can be done from the PAG side? So what can you do to improve the relationship with the industry in the direction of transparency and trust that we have said during this session that we want to achieve?
Yeah, I always say that we patient organizations have an important role to play in developing this trust between us and the industry. From our side, we could better prepare the patients when they have to participate to these ad board meetings or interviews. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. Like we do not always have the time to do it. Often we cannot do it at its best at the optimal level. And I also believe that because of this lack of time, we often do not ask all the questions so that we should ask the industry, so to have the full picture and then prepare the patients at best. In any case, I could say that we are working on this, and we are preparing some standardized procedures that could be used and facilitate a positive interaction between the industry and the patients. So we are working on filling this gap.
Thank you. Kristen?
Yeah, I think those are excellent points, Antonella. I've agreed with everything that you've said on this webinar. I think too, we can also help in two ways about making sure that the right people are in the room to have the conversation. We have a very unique vantage point when we work for a patient advocacy organization, knowing all the players. And I think we can help to have the right people at the table to ensure that it's the most productive that it can be. And I think another thing that we can do, and this goes back to talking about the lay summaries and those types of things, is making sure that the conversation is happening in a way that patients and families can understand it. Because I think industry does its absolute best to make sure that the materials can be understood and the conversations happening at a level and with words that are used every day by patients. And we're experts in that. So that's one of the other ways I think we can really help, because that's not intuitive. That's not easy to do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much to the three of you, Maria, Kristen, and Antonella. This has been extremely valuable. I've taken some notes while we were speaking. I don't want to go through all of them because I want to save some time for the questions, but you have mentioned several points very interesting, like we have to collect patient experience data in a methodological rigorous way, but we have to make sure that we don't always go to the sort of safest group of patients, and we have to ensure that we are being representative in a way we collect our data. We said that PAGs realize when interaction with the industry is not intentional, and even patients realize, and they may be not completely sort of open and let me say thoughtful in the way they answer their question if the industry and the relationship with them is more tick of the box exercise or is not intentional. So we are asking patients, but we are not getting the data that we want from them. Also, Antonella made a great point about how is understandable when industry works in silos and how important it is to have other stakeholders from the industry being present and leverage the patient experience data that we are collecting. For example, you mentioned market access, Antonella, among others, because they can really benefit from there. So from that. And also we have seen as the industry can make in some ways can make the interaction with the patient community more intentional and more meaningful, adopting best practices such as giving the patients the right time to answer questions, making a safe space for participants to allow questions. Maria said about education and creating knowledge, capability about what we are going to discuss in order to have the most meaningful conversations. And finally, we have seen as long-term activities, for example, councils, potentially with an in-person component, could be sort of the favorite standard way, together with surveys and focus group, to interact with the patient community and to collect patient experience data. Nevertheless, the patient community could be open to other methodologies if we are transparent and we are explaining why and what's the added value of, for example, having other, maybe more burdensome methodologies in place for data collection. So I hope I was able to capture everything, and thanks again. We have 10 minutes so we can go through some questions. I see that there are some in the chat. I will start with a question from Sheila that asks to the three of you, what recommendation would you give to a new patient advocacy group that wants to begin to participate more actively in this kind of collaborations with the industry? So an advice for PAGs that are starting, let's say, these collaborations. If who wants to start?
I'll start just saying something briefly. I think it's fantastic that you're just interested in wanting to do that. I think one of the first things you can do if you don't already have the experience in-house in doing this is to educate yourselves, talk to other PAGs who are experienced in doing this type of work, and you can learn a lot that way. If you do already know how to do this, I think now it becomes part of your conversations with your industry partners to let them know that this is a service, so to speak, that you can provide, and stating the case with using many of the things that we talked about today, and of course incorporating some of your own, but many of the benefits to the patient, the caregiver communities, to the industry partners, and to the patient advocacy group. I think presenting it as the win-win-win is the way to go, and letting them know about your capabilities. Excuse me.
Yeah, and I can add, so I totally agree, and I can only add that it is important not to doubt of the contribution that you can provide to the discussion, because whatever you will contribute to will be of value. And if there is something that you do not understand during the discussion, do not be shy or afraid to ask, because you have the right to understand, or also the duty to understand whatever is said on the table. Because unfortunately, for my experience, it can happen that the industry speaks a language that is too complex, too complicated for the patient to understand. And so ask an additional question, try to, I mean, at the end, you have to understand what is discussed.
I would maybe just add that indeed your voice matters, and you can also learn from more experienced patient groups. And there are also information and tools and materials available and trainings through organizations like EUPATI, and these materials are freely available. And so also maybe understand what are the training needs among your group, and the level of understanding already about medicines R&D, and there might be some gaps that can be then filled with additional training.
Of course, and there are trainings available, for example, through the EUPATI platform that are available, and they are for this matter. Another question from the audience. Let's see if we can tackle two or just this one. It's for the three of you. Antonella, you mentioned that the feedback loops are missing sometimes. What are the most effective ways for companies to show patient and advocacy groups that their input led to a tangible changes or decision? You have mentioned some of them today, but is there something else that comes into your mind?
Well, it is so. Unfortunately, it's common practice. It's common practice, I must say. The industry, the patients participate into ad board meetings, for instance, or into consultation, or even into clinical trials. There are very, very few companies that provide a lay language summary of the results of the clinical trial that the patient has been involved. So some basic basic activities, reports. You can write a report on how the patient's voice has been utilized into the ad board. If it has been taken into consideration at all, like if it has contributed to making any change into the direction where you were going. And then a report on the inputs of the patient, like as I said, a report on the outcomes of the clinical trial, even if the outcomes are negative, because that helps to strengthen the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's fair, definitely. Maria and Kristen, any thoughts on that? Something that you would like to add to this point?
Not from my side, but very well said by Antonella.
Great. So we have the time to cover, I think, one last question. So let me read this one. How can industry partners structure, for example, advisory boards or engagement sessions to ensure patients feel safe, respected, and comfortable, while still maintaining meaningful participation from sponsors and other stakeholders? Here, Kristen and Maria, do you want to have a final sentence about it, and then we can close the webinar?
I'll jump in, Maria, unless you want to say something first. I was just going to say, I think that setting expectations is quite key, understanding what everyone can expect, what the roles and responsibilities are of people in the room, so that that is established, so there aren't any surprises for people, can go a long way. And I also think that I liked what Maria said too about being the flexibility of allowing for conversations to develop. I think that can go a long way too in ensuring that people feel trusted, right? That we're all partners on this journey together down this river. So I think that's another thing I might add to that. But I don't think I think sometimes we overthink it, and it can be very simple, just as much as being human to each other. Rather than it having to be something over orchestrated or elaborate.
Thanks a lot,
Maybe
Kristen.
I can
That's important.
I had an idea is to include a patient representative in the planning of the activity already early on to make sure that once you get to the activity, patients have already been involved in designing it.
Yeah, and if I can add, Giulia, it's very important what Kristen said, just be human. I would also add, allow enough time for reflection and discussion, because sometimes the agenda is so packed that you know, there is this hurry, the feeling of hurry, and that we refrain instead of incentivize the patients to contribute, and can also create some friction.
Thank you very much. I think the three of you have beautifully closed this webinar. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you to your audience for participating. And we will follow up to the questions that we were not able to answer today and provide the link to the recording. Thanks again to our amazing speakers, and have a nice rest of the day. I'll close the webinar now. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Antonella, and thank you, Maria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.